Welcome to the Sustainable Living Podcast. Tips, tools, and tactics for living a heart-centered life that honors Mother Earth and her inhabitants. The information shared on the Sustainable Living Podcast reflects the opinions of host Marian West, Janice Friant, and their guests. Please use your own discretion in research before applying any information to your individual situation. Now, here are your hosts, Marian and Janice.
Hello, everyone. This is Marianne West with the Sustainable Living Podcast, and I'm so excited to be here with a very special woman. My guest has lots of experience in living with people, and she actually has written a couple of books about how to get started with intentional community and how to create a life together. She is involved in organizations which help people to get started in intentional communities and is a sought-after speaker. She travels all over the world. Well, maybe not all over, but to many parts of the world to give workshops and speeches. So I'm so pleased to welcome Diana Leafe Christian to our podcast. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you. Actually, my last name is just Christian.
Oh, Christian. Yes, it is. And I have been in my head saying it wrong. I have this thing with names that I mess up names. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Diana Leafe Christian. There we go. Diana, you are going to be coming to San Diego.
Yes.
We are very excited to host you very soon. And we are going to offer a couple of different workshops down here. And I thought maybe we touch a little bit onto the topics we are going to explore here. But I don't want to make it really local because our audience is really from all over the world. So we definitely make it applicable for everybody. In my introduction, I already said that you're instrumental in helping people live in intentional communities, and you live in one yourself, right?
Yes, I live in an intentional community called Earth Haven Ecovillage in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And I wrote a book called Creating a Life Together, Practical Tools to Grow Ecovillages and Intentional Communities. And the purpose of the book was to write down the research that I had learned by interviewing people who created successful new communities and unsuccessful ones. I wanted to know what the successful ones did and did not do, and vice versa. So it's a how-to book. So the way that I attempt to help people learn how to create communities and live in them successfully is through the research in that book and workshops that I do and articles that I write for Communities Magazine and other publications.
Would you, since you were talking about successfully and unsuccessfully, would you very quickly tell us how the rate is, like how many people start out in community and are successful?
Well, it seemed to me at the time, which was the 1990s, and just looking at the U.S., that it was about 90% failure and only 10% success. And I describe success is that you actually buy the property and you move there and you start doing the activities of community that you had intended all along. And failure I describe as not ever getting to that stage, or getting to that stage, but then for one reason or another having to disband. So 10% success and 90% failure. Later, I talked to researchers in Europe and other places and other people in the U.S. who've been looking at the same thing, and they all came up with the same idea that it was about 90% failure, 10% success. Well, I want it to be 100% success. So that's why I wrote my book, and that's why I do the work I do.
Excellent. In your book, would you just tell us a little bit how you help people to be successful?
Well, I just recommend the successful communities did. I'm a reporter rather than a community founder. So what I did is I just shared the information of what people said worked well. And so essentially what works well is to put very important key structures or processes in place at the beginning when the group is newly forming. And if you like, Mariana, I can name those factors.
Would you? That would be wonderful.
Sure. The first is to have a shared vision and mission and purpose, that everybody knows what it is. so they know what the whole reason for the community is, and what it's for, why they're doing it, and what it isn't, what it's not for, because that might be some different community somewhere else that someone else is starting, so that they can attract people who will want to do exactly what they want to do and who won't want to turn it into some other kind of thing. They need to have a fair and participatory method for self-governance and making decisions. I now recommend Sociocracy, a self-governance system. When I wrote the book, I recommended consensus decision-making, but I no longer do, and I can tell you why if you like.
Yes.
So those are two things. A third one is to have clear agreements in writing so that people can look up what their agreements are and they don't forget them. And to have good process and communication skills. And I highly recommend that they learn and use nonviolent communication for how people talk to each other, and restorative circles, which is a conflict resolution method that works very, very well. And another one is that they have a way to help people stay accountable to their agreements, that they not only have clear agreements in writing, but they help each other keep those agreements. They have ways to help each other keep them. And they also have a whole lot of fun together. They do things which I call creating community glue, which means they have shared enjoyable activities, and it gives them a sense of camaraderie and trust and goodwill and harmony. And lastly, that they understand that they have a project that they have to manage. So they have ongoing management of their project, which they can do through their governance system. But what I mean by management is they need to know how much money they have and how much they will need and how much resources of energy and labor and time they have to take care of their physical infrastructure and their social and cultural infrastructure.
Excellent.
Mariana, I forgot to say one of the most important things, to have a clear and thorough membership process. So incoming people know the vision and mission of the community, and they understand it and support it, who agree to abide by the agreement, who generally get along with most people most of the time, who have the same shared values and lifestyle choices of the people creating the community, and also that they don't have any addictions or a history of verbal or emotional or even physical abuse have next door to you and your children. So that's it.
Would you repeat? You clicked out a little bit. So I'm just paraphrasing what I'm heard. Said they don't have abuse in the past or drug addiction or any addiction of any kind, right?
Well, I'm suggesting what might be called red flags.
Right.
Things that the group, if they see that in the new incoming person, they think, oh, no, thank you. Oh, how does the community members know anything like this about the new incoming person? Well, I ask that they ask that new person or the new family for references, and then they call the references, and that they ask them to live with them or spend time with them for a period of time without any decision-making rights, just to be there in the forming group or in the community so that everyone can get to know them for some period of time and make a decision later after getting to know them and after having called the references and the references were favorable.
So you just said a whole bunch of things I want to talk to you about, but also it's the first thing which popped into my mind that everything you said is really applicable just about any kind of community endeavor, even a business.
I agree. I didn't know anything about businesses or management when I did this sort of informal research. And when I described this in workshops, people who are in business in the workshop say, well, that's just basic good business, because I don't know. So yeah, the things that work in business work in starting a community, but with the added part that we live there together and we have shared enjoyable activities.
Yeah. Well, I think even for businesses, or I want to expand to nonprofit organizations, having shared and joyful activities together is quite important as well. So I want to come back to some of the things you were saying. I think one word you mentioned is maybe some you want to explain. Sociocracy again.
Yes.
I stumble on words, and I was really looking at it. And, when I heard it for the first time, I was like, what is this? So would you please explain?
Sociocracy is how you say it. Gerard Hindenburg was a Dutch electrical engineer who created the word. He made it up from Latin and Greek in the 1970s. The word socios is Latin for people we associate with, or peers, colleagues, friends, partners. And the word ocracy from Greek, of course, means governance by. So sociocracy means governance by friends and peers and colleagues. It's not like democracy, which means everybody in the whole culture. And it's not like the king decides or one boss leader person decides. We all decide in self-organizing circles of distributed leadership. And so I love to teach intentional communities and member-led groups like food co-ops and bicycle co-ops and car co-ops and other co-ops how to do this.
Can you explain a little bit more? What is the difference between using this method and using consensus?
I'd be happy to. I have used consensus in my own life in a nonprofit that I worked for and in my own community, Earth Haven, for about 20 years. And I teach it and I facilitate it, so I know it well. So I'm really clear about the differences between consensus and sociocracy. Consensus is a decision-making method, and sociocracy is an entire self-governance system which includes a decision-making method and 4 other meeting processes as well. It includes how to create a proposal in the first place in the group, and how to select people for roles in the group, and how to help people get better at their roles through role improvement feedback, and one other group process. And it includes, as I mentioned, a series of self-organizing circles like teams or committees. And they are self-organizing, but they're semi-autonomous. It's a kind of a nested or circular hierarchy of circles. It's very unusual. I haven't seen this anywhere else, except in one other similar but different method called holacracy. But sociocracy and consensus aren't very much alike because, again, consensus is only about decision-making, and sociocracy is about decision-making and a whole lot more. Also, the decision-making method in sociocracy, which is called consent decision-making, has similar goals to consensus in that we hear from everyone, but it has different outcomes. It tends not to trigger conflict and heartbreak and demoralization, which can occur when a group uses consensus and some people block the proposal for what seems like personal reasons and nobody can do anything about it. That doesn't really happen in sociocracy.
Interesting. So it sounds like a maybe more effective system to govern or self-govern as a group than consensus. Because I have been in groups where consensus was being used and it sometimes seemed like a very, let's say, hard process.
Yes, that's my experience also. For many years, I was a consultant to intentional communities who were using consensus, and they would call me in because they were having so much conflict. And I would help them make better agendas and learn to facilitate in better ways. But it almost always would end up with conflict when people didn't really understand that blocking a proposal is something that one does not do very much in one's whole lifetime. It shouldn't be done frivolously or lightly. But in intentional communities and other kinds of member-led groups, sometimes people would block something other people wanted. Or what would be even worse, I think, is the group would be talking about an idea that a lot of people wanted to continue to explore. And 1 or 2 or 3 or even just one person would say, I don't like that idea. I will never support that idea. So we don't even make a proposal. We don't even talk about it in a meeting. We know that that person will block it because everybody potentially could block it. So we don't even go there. So we don't even get to try the idea for a while to see if we like it and if it works. It's a sad thing. I call that premature proposal death. That never happens in sociocracy.
Yeah, that sounds like a very significant difference. Now, you were saying you're getting called in as a consultant. People can find you at your website, which is www.DianaLeafeChristian. I didn't say it's a wrong ending this time. .org. And I will put it in the show notes. And when you go on Diana's website, you can find all the different services she is doing and also the workshop. So when you come to San Diego, you're going to do a shortish kind of, it's just a 1-day event. The day before, you have a slideshow. The slideshow is you visiting different intentional communities, right?
That's right. On Friday night, February 3rd in San Diego, I'll be doing my Ecovillage slideshow where I share with the people photos and stories about some amazing and wonderful Ecovillage residential communities around the world, because it's an international movement, many of which I have visited, and I'll tell about that. And then I'm going to show 2 that I have not visited that I want people to know about because they're so wonderful. And then the next day, Saturday, February 4th, in the morning, I'll be talking about the 3 aspects of a healthy, thriving community and antidotes to structural conflict for groups that are getting started and groups that are already existing. We'll just do that in a short session, maybe just 2.5 or 3 hours in the morning on Saturday, February 4th. And after lunch, I will be doing an introduction to Sociocracy and what it looks like, the 7 parts, how it works, an overview, really, just to give a taste. And then I'll be teaching people one of the processes that they can take with them and use in their own group. So it's not instruction, really, because that's a 3-day workshop, which I might come back to the San Diego area in the fall and do. We've been talking about that possibility. But on February 4th, Saturday, people can go just to the morning session about 3 aspects of a healthy, thriving community, or just to the afternoon session, an overview of sociocracy, or to both sessions.
Yeah. And then you're right now have been teaching a workshop in San Francisco and you're probably returning for another one. So if this touches you, our listener, as some of interest, go to Diana's website and see what it takes to get her to your community or to your area. I really feel that what you're teaching really does apply to so much more than just intentional communities. Not everybody is at that space where they want to create and actually live in intentional community. But like you kind of touched on already with co-ops and so forth, there are a lot of different forms of an intentional community. Would you talk a little bit about that? What different, ways of forming community are out there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think there's maybe about 8 different basic kinds. I wrote another book called Finding Community, How to Find and Join an Ecovillage or Intentional Community. And I outline these different kinds at the beginning of the book. So one kind is cohousing. It is the fastest growing kind of intentional community in the U.S. I don't think there are cohousing communities in Southern California. I don't think there are any in San Diego yet or Los Angeles yet, although there are quite a few in the San Francisco Bay Area where I am now and in various other parts of Northern California. Cohousing is a way to create your own neighborhood yourselves and with the help of a developer. And it was created and first originated in Denmark in the early 1960s and 70s. And so there are probably going on 170 or 180 co-housing communities in the U.S. There's maybe 20 or so in Canada. And they're really all throughout the English-speaking world and in Europe, particularly in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway and the Netherlands, and now Germany and Austria as well. So that's one kind, co-housing. So did you want me to say more kinds?
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you a question so to make sure I understood this right. So this is people actually getting together and getting a developer and developing a piece of land towards the desires they have. Do I understand that right?
Yes, but I think I didn't be specific enough. And so thank you for the question. It's usually in an urban area or some part of a city or a small town. The purpose of it is to create a great neighborhood, which is especially good for families with young children and is especially good for older people. And it's good for everybody, really. But it's multi-generational, usually, and everybody lives in their own housing unit, like an apartment or like a townhouse, but it's a little bit smaller than the kind of house most people are used to. And then they all co-own and use a bigger house, which is called the common house, where there's a kitchen, a living room, and a laundry room, and a children's playroom, and guest rooms, and meals together in their common house 2 or 3 times a week. And they have a rotation of a crew who cooks the meals. It's themselves who cook, get together and visit and have a great time. And they have meetings and they decide things because they manage their community themselves, as all intentional communities do. And this is called cohousing. It's usually urban, but not always. And it's usually only about let's create a great neighborhood.
Interesting. Yeah, this sounds very doable. You know, maybe easier. I know in San Diego, there are a lot of people which are building community by renting a house together and go beyond the just roommate situation, but by really trying to live in community, which is,
yes,
you know, much closer on each other, so to speak. If you have your own space, it seems, just from my perception, seems a little bit easier than if you have somebody right next to you all the time.
Well, may I address that, please, Mariana? Another kind of intentional community is a shared group household, which usually occurs in cities and towns and suburban neighborhoods, sometimes also rural. And yes, in that kind of community, which is not as common as cohousing, but I've certainly lived in that kind before myself when I was younger and needed to share a house with others because I couldn't afford my own. Then each person has their own room, or each couple has their own room, and then they all use the living room, the kitchen, the bathrooms. They cook their meals and have meals together, usually. I know quite a few communities like this, and I call this a shared group household. A third kind of community is what you will have heard of, and your listeners as well, an Ecovillage. And that sounds like a village and it sounds rural, but an Ecovillage can be urban, like Los Angeles Ecovillage. It can be suburban or semi-rural or rural. Why an Ecovillage is called that as compared to just a community is because its purpose is to help people understand how to live more ecologically sustainably than they have been doing before they moved there. And so they quite often do the normal things like composting and recycling, but they might be off the grid. They might also grow much of their own food. They might do roof water catchment. They might use composting toilets. They might do various ecological sustainability kinds of things. If they are rural, they also have to be economically sustainable, meaning they have to have a way for people to make a living while they're living there. So they might telecommute. They might have a local job somewhere. They might have a small company providing a service or making something that they can ship out mail order as long as they can live there in this rural area. So rural ecovillages are often also economically sustainable. And of course, they have to be socially sustainable. That is, they have to get along well together and have their own self-governance and decision-making method. Well, the biggest thing about ecovillages, though, is that they have a purpose, which is to learn ecological sustainability and then teach it to others, to teach what they're learning as they're learning it. So they generally have tours and workshops and classes, and that's how they let people know what they're doing and help spread the word that you too can live like this. That's the third kind. Would you like me to continue telling you some more kinds of intentional communities besides co-housing, ecovillages, and shared group houses?
Yes, I would love to, because I think that unless people are familiar with, and have really looked into that subject. So yeah, I would love to hear more.
Okay, sure. One kind is a housing co-op, which is a legal entity. It's actually the name of a legal entity, but it's also a kind of community where everybody owns a share in the co-op and then they have a lease to their own apartment. Usually these are like apartment buildings and usually they are urban. but they're not always urban. Sometimes they're rural, and what everybody owns is a share in the property, and then they have a lease to their own little plot of land where they have a house. And so on the one hand, it's a legal entity, and you can use it to create your community, such as Ecovillage at Ithaca in upstate New York uses the housing co-op legal form for their 3 different neighborhoods. But other than that, there's this thing called housing co-ops. So there are regular housing co-ops, and New York City has some that are very famous. They're giant apartment buildings, and they're owned as a co-op. And the people elect a board of directors, and the board of directors does the management for the whole apartment building. But sometimes they are affordable housing co-ops, and the whole point of the co-op is that people who don't have the money normally to buy their own place can utilize the benefits of the affordable housing co-op to be able to have ownership. They don't exactly own their apartment. They own a share, but they live in their apartment, and so it feels like ownership. And that is a very strong movement in the U.S. and Canada, affordable housing co-ops. Another kind of community is where it's sometimes called a virtual neighborhood, where a group of people buy several houses around a city block. So they take down the fences, and the backyards all connect to each other. So they have one big yard in between all of their backyards, and they live all around the block. Or they don't live all around the block, but they live in 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 houses that connect to each other. Sometimes the way they do this is that they have houses next to each other or up and down the street on a city block that they own together or that they rent together. And that's how they're creating what you might call a virtual neighborhood. It's a way to have a nice community in a city. And you might have your own set of rooms in one of the houses. Maybe one of the houses serves as the community building where you go to have meals and to cook food and so on. So that's another kind. Then there are rural retreat and conference centers where the whole purpose of the community is for people to take classes and workshops. Sometimes the community itself provides the content of the class and workshop. They put on their own. Sometimes they are a venue that other people rent their venue to put on classes and workshops. So Lost Valley Educational Center in Oregon, for example, is a community like that. You can go there for events and classes. One community that I know of, which is called Breitenbush Hot Springs, offers hot springs services, and it's in rural Oregon. So when you go to Breitenbush Hot Springs, you go to the community and you go get into the various hot and cold pools. You can get massages and all kinds of wonderful body work, and then you can leave because they just provided a very nice service. But the people who run it are an intentional community, and they live across a bridge, across the river, in their own homes where they live in community together. So they've got a community-owned business called the Hot Springs. Other kinds of rural communities include gay and lesbian communities where just the gay men all live there together, or just the gay women live all there together because they would like to live in a place with people who have the same preferences, experiences, values, and lifestyle as themselves. So that's yet another kind. Another kind is rural, back to the land, homesteading communities. And this is where it looks like an eco-village pretty much, except they don't have an educational mission, and they really would rather that you did not visit them because they want you to leave them alone because they're busy doing their life and they don't really have time for the public to come traipsing through. And so the difference between a rural homesteading community and a rural eco-village is the educational mission. The last one I want to mention is called a commune. I'm sure you've heard this term. Mm-hmm. It's actually an economic term. It means we all together own the property and own our community business or businesses, more than one, or we don't own any businesses, but we all go to our separate jobs, and when we come back, we put all of our salaries and wages into the same bank account, which we, the community, own. They can be rural, like Twin Oaks in Virginia, Sand Hill Farm in Missouri, East Wind in Missouri, Alpha Farm in Oregon. They can be urban, like the Jolly Ranchers. in Seattle. And sometimes you get a little stipend or in your own room that you live in for your bedroom, and food, because you all together cook the food and buy the food and you all do all that together. Other times you don't get a stipend. You just go buy what you need, like toothpaste or a new CD or something that you need to have, but not very much money. And then you write it down in a book and everybody looks at the books and says, yeah, this is fine. And so that's an income sharing commune. Sometimes these are called income sharing communities. Sometimes they're called communes. The press, newspaper reporters and online publication reporters and TV news reporters, they often call all kinds of intentional communities communes because they haven't gotten over the 60s yet. And they're still using a word, back from those days. But I'm telling you, Mariana, commune is a very specific word for income sharing commune. Well, that's it. That's all the kinds of communities that I know about.
Well, that's a lot. And that's a lot of options. And you clarified some for me. I wasn't aware that the Ecovillage needed to have the educational aspect. I saw it said everybody who lives in community and wants to live more ecological is called an Ecovillage. So thank you for educating me on that one. I wanted to circle back a little bit to some you said about things people do in successful communities. And you mentioned restorative circles. And I'm really interested to hear what that is and what it looks like.
Sure, I'll be happy to. I'm pretty excited about restorative circles. There is a movement in the U.S. and across the world, really, called Restorative Justice. And what it means is that the people who have been accused of a crime, or they've been not only accused but also convicted of a crime, and there are victims of their crime, instead of the accused or convicted person going to jail or paying a large fine somehow, they find a way to make it up to the victims. That is the field called restorative justice. And there are quite a few different kinds of restorative justice methods within that. One of the kinds is called restorative circles. It was created in Brazil in the middle 1990s by a British man who had moved to Brazil, and he was interested in how there was terrible conflict between the urban gangs in the slums of Rio de Janeiro, where he lived. And these gangs were based on making money through drug selling, and they were rival gangs, so they would kill each other or shoot each other and wound each other. It was very seriously bad, and it was very, very dangerous to live in one of these slum areas in Brazil because you could be shot by a bullet not even intended for you. And if you became a gang member, which you pretty much had to do because that's the way to be safe, although not really safe. And so he wanted to know how the gangs could stop killing each other. And so he went into the slums and started talking to the children to find out what the values were. He had learned Portuguese by this time. And between him and the children, he met the parents, and he began to create various mediation meetings. And through trial and error, seeing what worked well and what did not work well, he learned that doing certain things really helped the group create a restoration of goodwill. So what he eventually worked out was that the members of the conflict meet with the facilitator of the process one-on-one. Everybody involved in the conflict has a meeting with the facilitator to tell their story, what happened, and why it was so awful for them and why it was so painful. Then they have a circle with everybody there, not just the parties to the conflict, but also their families and anybody else in the wider community who is connected with that conflict. And then they each tell their story, and they understand what each other felt and needed when these difficult things happen. And then the facilitator asks the parties to the conflict, first person A, then person B, then person C, and so on. Would you be willing to voluntarily do something to repair the damage that has resulted for that person? And would you be willing voluntarily to restore the relationship with that person? So they're doing two things. Repair, that's the word reparation. It means If you broke somebody's window, you pay to get the window fixed. But restoration means you also go over to their house and ask, can I clean your windows? Can I clean out your garage for you? Can I bring you a freshly baked apple pie? Can I do something nice for you to show my intention to restore goodwill between us because I regret breaking your window. I'm fixing your window, but I'd also like to do something else. So the idea is a voluntary act of goodwill. Is it mandatory? Is it required? No, it's just voluntary. And this worked so incredibly well among the gangs in the slums of Rio de Janeiro that this method began to spread to other parts of Brazil. And so court systems in Brazil and the various states and cities would use it. And then school systems to use it between children in the schoolyard and in the classes. Well, after a while, the news, how good this was, spread beyond Brazil. And now it's in many, many countries in the world, not used by the whole country, but used by various court systems and used by various school districts and other organizations. And usually it is nonviolent communication trainers who are the ones who know how to do this and who teach it. So I know several different restorative circles trainers who live in communities or used to. So they are experienced at teaching intentional communities how to do this and in setting up this method. I think this is the best method any community can use to resolve its conflicts. And so, Mariana, that's why I recommend it so highly.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. It just seems anything, if you can do it voluntarily, it's so much better than if somebody else tells you to do it, you know, because it builds resentment and yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Diana, is there something else you would like to tell our listeners?
Oh, sure. Also in San Diego at Emerald Village, which is near Vista in San Diego County, I'll be doing an Ecovillage slideshow on Friday night, February 10th, or maybe Friday, February 11th. We haven't decided the dates yet. And then the next day there will probably be maybe the slideshow and or maybe a tour of Emerald Village, which is a lovely new eco-village on 7 acres. And they put on educational events, possibly a question and answer presentation and a potluck dinner for the visitors and the Emerald Village residents to meet each other. So that will happen the week after we're doing our event on February 3rd and 4th. Why don't I ask you if you would like me to tell people anything about Sociocracy, the governance and decision-making communities and co-ops and nonprofits and other kind of member-led groups?
Yeah, I would love that. Please.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. First of all, to remind us and your podcast listeners, Sociocracy means governance by peers and colleagues. It was created in the Netherlands in the 1970s and has now spread around the world, and different businesses, nonprofit organizations, and intentional communities use it. My specialty is in teaching it to intentional communities and sometimes to co-ops and member-led groups. What I like about it is that it's a whole system of self-governance. There isn't no top big boss that tells you what to do. We together organize our work tasks. We together hear from all of us, but not all at the same time. And it has 4 kinds of benefits that I have found so far in intentional communities. One kind of benefit is that meetings go better. That's the first thing people say. Their meetings go better. And as you and I both know, we can be in meetings using consensus decision-making. Sometimes the meeting takes a long time. Sometimes there's conflict. Sometimes it doesn't work out too well, even though everyone's intention is for harmony and goodwill and to hear from everyone. So the first thing, meetings go better. And the second thing is that we tend to get more done. People find that the work tasks that they have tend to get more done and sooner with more people involved and more people involved in leadership roles. So that is a total benefit. And the third benefit of the 4 main benefits that I've seen is that we seem to be better organized. We know who's doing what tasks. We know what will happen if we don't do our task. Other people will know, and then they'll check in with us and see if they can help us move forward in doing our tasks. So we're getting more done, but we also have more transparency and accountability, and we have more equivalence because we all know what's going on, and more effectiveness. It's just a more effectively run whatever it is. So that's one thing. And the fourth one is we tend to have a more feeling of connection and goodwill between our community members or between our co-op members. So that's some of the benefits.
Those are huge. Just even more people stepping up in leadership roles. I think that's really a huge thing, because it seems that often a couple of people crystallize out as leaders and then everybody else steps back. And I think it's instrumental to have many people step up and take responsibility.
Oh, I agree with you completely. May I tell the 7 parts? Well, I'll tell what sociocracy basically is in an overview, and then I can tell you the 7 parts that I think are the necessary parts for it to work well. May I do that?
Yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay, great. When somebody says, what the heck is sociocracy? It's just an easy answer. It's a governance method and a decision-making method. The 3 basic things about sociocracy, if anybody asks you, is it's governance, decision-making, and continuous improvement. Continuous improvement means you use feedback loops, which is simple and easy to do, and I can explain that. But so if somebody says, well, what is that sociocracy thing? Governance, decision-making, and feedback loops. That's kind of an overview, quick way to say what it is. But really there are 7 parts there's more than 7, but these are the 7 parts that work together to mutually reinforce each other and to help each other part work better. And so here's what they are. First of all, a series of circles, and each circle has a very clear area of responsibility and very clear aims or continuous objectives, which is what that circle is supposed to do and provide for the community or provide for the member-led organization. Circles are like committees or teams, but because there is so much circular movement in sociocracy, we tend to call them circles, and that feels good, So the first part, circles, and every circle, team, committee, has a very clear area of responsibility and ongoing objectives. They also have what's called double links, which means 2 people are members, full decision-making members of this one circle, and then they're full decision-making members of another circle, and they go to both meetings and they share information between the meetings. That's not the only way that information is shared, but that is one of the ways. The flow of information is freely given and transparent, so everyone in the organization can know everything about what's going on. So that's one thing. The second thing is continuous improvement, by which means you use feedback loops. Feedback loops is an engineering term. It can be a little intimidating unless you're an engineer, which I'm not. But what it means is, in the proposals that you make in your group, you put wording in the proposal that shows the ways that you will later measure and evaluate the impact of your proposal once it has been implemented. Once you have put it in place in real time, in real space, some weeks or some months later, you have 1 or more meetings where you talk with each other about how is this implemented proposal working out in real life. You don't have to guess ahead of time. All you have to do is try it and then measure and evaluate it 1 or more times. And when you do that, you can keep it the way it is, change it if that's possible, and if you designed it so you can change it, or not do it anymore, just get rid of it. And that gives you a lot of freedom to try new things, to take risks, and to try something for a while. So any proposal that you look at does not have to be perfect. It only has to be good enough for now and safe enough to try, which is a basic part of sociocracy. Okay, that's 2 parts. Circles and double links, clear areas of responsibility and clear continuous objectives. What it is that each circle does. Building feedback loops, continuous improvement into all of our proposals. And then 5 meeting processes. And these are simple and quick. 1 is creating proposals. 1 is considering and deciding proposals through something called consent decision making. Selecting people for roles similar to elections, but better. role improvement feedback, where we help the people in the roles get better and better in their role as they serve in that term length. That's just more feedback, right? Improvement, continuous improvement. And the fifth meeting process is called consenting to circle members, because all of us in a circle consent to each other being in that circle and to new people who might want to join. So that's the 7 parts. And these parts help make the whole thing work better. They serve as a series of checks and balances to mitigate against abuses of power and power over and the kinds of hurtful, painful, distracting things that can happen in meetings. They tend not to happen in meetings. If the group uses sociocracy accurately, everyone has learned it, and they use all 7 parts. So, Mariana, I think of this as being analogous to a bicycle. If you will think about the frame of a bicycle, the front wheel, the back wheel, the handlebars, the pedals and gears and changing gears, and the brakes, these 7 parts all make the other parts work better so the bicycle can go forward and not fall over, and you can steer it and get to where you're going. But if you removed some of the part, depending on what you removed, you could still do it, but it would be really hard. But if you removed the frame or the front wheel or the back wheel, you couldn't go anywhere. And so I love to make this analogy because sociocracy can be misapplied, misunderstood, used incorrectly, used only partially, and then it tends not to work. And then the sad thing that happens is the people using this sort of fake pseudo sociocracy say, well, this thing doesn't even work. And I'm thinking, wait, no, yes, it does. You're just not using it right. Or you're just not using all the parts. You're riding a bicycle without the seat, without the handlebars. No wonder it hurts. So that's my analogy. Thanks for letting me tell you that.
Thank you for telling it. I love that analogy because it really brings it home. Said, I think it's not just to sociocracy. Said, see, my pronunciation of words it's one of my ongoing problems here, but said it can apply to just about everything. Said, if you use only parts of it, it just doesn't work out. I love putting it into the framework of the bicycle because I think most of us are familiar with it and really can visualize without a wheel, without a brake. I mean, you can ride without a brake, but it might not work out too well, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. Especially in San Francisco going downhill. That would be a really bad idea.
That's right. I have been doing sociocracy workshop. I did one this last weekend here, and I will finish the 3rd day next Sunday. And then I'm coming back to the Bay Area. I'm in the East Bay, Berkeley and Oakland, and I'm going to do another one in the East Bay on February 18, 19, and 20. And so there's a lot of demand for this, so I'll be doing another workshop. So if any of your podcast listeners are in the Bay Area, I'd like them to know about that workshop too.
Absolutely. And I'm definitely going to put it in the show notes because, I really feel, our podcast is, I think, part of this is people are seeking, the 60s, you mentioned the 60s before. I think it was a time of people seeking to do things differently. And we are kind of at a time like that again. Only I think this time, maybe people are coming at it with more planning. Building community is so important in all of that. So that's my opinion.
I agree completely.
Diana, is there anything else on your mind you would like to share?
Thank you. No, I've loved our interview. Thank you so much for asking me to do it.
Thank you for coming on, and I'm really looking forward to meet you in person. During our call, we had a bit of connectivity issues, and so sometimes the sentences might be a little weird, but I hope you still could understand what we meant to say. Thank you so much for listening, and I wanted to let you all know that we are on Instagram now. If you want to feature your sustainability project or your place on our Instagram account, send me an email at sustainablelivingpodcast@gmail.com or at Marianne@sustainablelivingpodcast.com with your picture and a brief description of what it is you're doing. And if you want to be reached with information how to reach you, we will post it to our Instagram account and probably to Facebook as well. So send us what you're doing. We want to know, because I know you guys are amazing and you do great stuff. So you know how to email us. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter and all over. And we love you and we love to hear from you. Take care and thank you so much for listening.